The night sky above Orion Gate Terminal glowed with a soft blue haze as ships drifted in and out like silent ghosts, and Ethan Cole walked through the arrival hall with tired shoulders and a weary heart. His long shift loading cargo crates had left his hands aching, and all he wanted was a few minutes of quiet before catching the late shuttle home. Yet something made him stop in the middle of the walkway, something small and trembling and easy for the rushing crowd to ignore. An old alien stood near the ticket machine, thin shoulders shaking, his robes torn at the edges and his long silver fingers struggling to tap the glowing screen. Each time he tried, the machine flashed red and beeped loudly, drawing annoyed looks from people passing by, but no kindness. No help, no pause. Ethan watched for a moment, feeling a slow pull in his chest, the kind that comes when a person knows deep inside that turning away would be wrong no matter how tired they are. So he stepped closer and spoke softly, asking if the alien needed help. The old alien lifted his head, and his eyes reflected a soft golden glow, not bright or dangerous, just tired and wounded and ancient. And he whispered that he did not have enough credits for travel, his voice shaking like thin glass about to crack. Ethan didn't even think about it. He simply pulled out his card and paid for the ticket, brushing off the alien's attempt to refuse, saying it was nothing, just a small gesture. But the alien stared at him as if he had just changed the shape of the universe. "You show mercy when others show fear," the alien murmured, his words trembling yet deep. "Your kindness will echo far beyond this moment, human." Ethan felt a strange chill down his spine because the voice did not sound like someone thanking him for a small favor. It sounded like a prophecy, like an old truth spoken from a forgotten world. But before he could ask anything, the ground beneath them vibrated, just enough to make the floor hum and the lights flicker in warning. At first, Ethan thought it was normal shuttle turbulence, but then an alarm blared through the terminal, sharp and urgent, followed by a mechanical voice ordering all civilians to stand still and remain calm, which of course made everyone panic instead. Flooding the hall with voices and footsteps, Ethan turned to look out of the wide glass wall that faced the landing bay, and his breath caught in his throat as three massive shapes descended from the clouds, silent and metallic, like armored beasts gliding through the sky, their hulls glowing with elite royal insignias that marked them as ships belonging to high command species, the kinds of warships that never came without purpose or danger. The old alien beside him tightened his grip on his staff and whispered something in a language Ethan didn't know, a sound filled with fear and resignation, and Ethan realized this was not a coincidence. These ships were not arriving randomly. They were coming for someone, and the way the alien trembled made it painfully clear who that someone was. Soldiers poured out of the first warship, moving in perfect formation, their armor dark and sharp-edged, their visors glowing with crimson scanning lights that swept across the hall like hunting eyes. One soldier shouted a name that echoed across the terminal, a name Ethan had never heard before, but the alien reacted instantly, shrinking back with a wounded gasp. People in the terminal panicked and ran. Security drones hovered overhead and broadcast orders to remain calm, but the soldiers ignored them, searching every face, scanning every life sign, every breath, and Ethan knew he could walk away. Pretend he didn't understand, pretend this wasn't his problem, but something inside him refused to move, refused to abandon the trembling alien, who looked like he had been running from fear for far too long. The old alien reached for Ethan's sleeve with a desperate grip that felt stronger than his frail body should allow, and his voice cracked as he whispered, "Please, help me hide. They must not take me. Not before I warn the galaxy." Ethan didn't understand what warning he meant, didn't understand why 3 elite warships would chase an old traveler who barely had enough credits to buy a ticket. But he understood fear, he understood desperation. He understood that sometimes the universe pushes a person into a moment that decides everything that comes after. Without thinking, he nodded and pulled the alien toward the service door behind the vending units, praying no soldier turned in their direction. The lights above flickered again as the warship's engines powered down, making the whole station tremble, like the galaxy was holding its breath. Ethan pushed open the maintenance door, guiding the alien into the narrow metal corridor beyond, and just before the door closed, he glanced back at the hall, at the soldiers spreading across the floor like a dark tide, searching. It was in that moment he realized something deep and terrifying, something that settled into his bones like cold fire. This wasn't just a simple act of kindness anymore. He had stepped into the beginning of a story much bigger than him. A story tied to warships, royal power, and secrets he could not yet imagine. And whatever happened next, his life would never return to the quiet world he knew. Ethan moved through the narrow service corridor with quick and careful steps, feeling the old alien's trembling hand gripping his sleeve as if it were the last thread holding him to safety, and the hum of the elite warships outside still echoed through the metal walls like distant thunder, reminding him that danger was only a few breaths behind them. The corridor lights flickered weakly above their heads, casting long shadows that stretched across the floor like dark fingers reaching for them, and the old alien stumbled once, forcing Ethan to catch him gently before he fell, feeling how fragile the creature was beneath those thin robes, as if time had carved weakness into his bones. Behind them, the muffled shouts of armored soldiers vibrated through the walls, each sound sharp and cold, making Ethan's heart beat harder, because he knew that if they were caught, there would be no explaining, no negotiating, no mercy from beings who had descended in warships meant only for orders of the highest authority. "Tell me your name," Ethan whispered as they reached a junction where 3 tunnels split in different directions, each silent, each filled with the smell of metal and machine oil, each one possibly leading them toward survival or straight into the soldier's path. The alien swallowed hard before answering, his voice thin but steady, saying his name was Varon, and Ethan repeated it quietly, feeling that the name carried weight, history, maybe even tragedy. But before he could ask more, Varon pulled at his sleeve and urged him to choose the left tunnel, saying it led to maintenance ducts the soldiers would not think to search immediately. Ethan followed, guiding him through the narrow space while the distant sound of boots marching in perfect rhythm grew louder, echoing through the station as more troops fanned out, scanning every corridor, every shadow, every piece of data the machines could offer. And it sent a cold chill down Ethan's spine knowing that these soldiers were not just searching, they were hunting. As they moved deeper into the tunnels, Varon's breathing became heavier, each inhale sounding like it scraped against his lungs, and Ethan slowed his pace even though fear urged him to run, because leaving the old alien behind was not something his heart would allow no matter how terrified he was. When they reached a small metal chamber used for storing old service drones, Ethan gently set Varon on a crate and crouched beside him, trying to steady his own breath as the alarms continued to wail faintly in the distance, their red glow shining through the tiny gaps in the walls like bleeding light. "What do they want from you?" Ethan asked, voice low but filled with urgency, and Varon pressed a trembling hand to his chest as if holding in a pain Ethan could not see, his eyes glowing faintly in the dim light as he whispered that the soldiers were not just looking for him. They were hunting him under direct orders from someone far worse, someone who feared what he carried, someone who wanted silence more than truth. Ethan felt a knot tighten in his chest as Varon continued, telling him that he had once been a respected scientist in his world, a creator of peaceful technologies, a man trusted by millions. But when he uncovered a secret that threatened the rising power of a royal figure, that trust turned into fear and he was forced into hiding, wandering from station to station, world to world, staying alive by the smallest acts of luck and kindness. Before Ethan could ask who the royal figure was, the floor vibrated again, this time more violently, sending dust falling from the ceiling as Varon's eyes widened in terror, and through the echoing metal they heard it, the heavy synchronized footsteps of soldiers entering the service wing, their voices amplified through helmets as they called out orders to sweep the entire area. Ethan quickly helped Varon stand, ignoring the pain spreading through his arms as the alien leaned on him, and together they slipped through a side hatch into a narrow ventilation shaft that felt too small for any human comfort. But it was their only chance, and Ethan pushed forward despite the tightness pressing against his shoulders. The shaft sloped downward and then opened into a wider maintenance tunnel that hummed with power lines running along its walls, bathing the space in a pale electric glow, and Ethan guided Varon along the path, trying to steady his fear as he heard the soldiers breaking into the drone chamber behind them, their weapons whirring softly as they scanned for life forms. Varon spoke again in a fragile whisper, telling Ethan that he knew the kindness shown at the terminal was not something the universe gave often, and he said that no human he had met had ever offered help without wanting something in return. But Ethan had acted with instinct, with empathy, with heart, and that was why Varon had chosen to trust him with his life. Ethan felt something shift inside him at those words, a deeper understanding of the path he had stepped onto, a path he never asked for yet could no longer walk away from, because now it wasn't just about hiding from soldiers. It was about protecting someone whose existence carried secrets powerful enough to shake worlds. A faint blue light appeared ahead, marking the entrance to an old docking bay no longer used by travelers but still connected to forgotten routes that engineers used during repairs, and Varan weakly pointed toward it, saying that beyond that bay was a chance, a small one, but a chance to escape before the soldiers closed the entire station. Ethan felt hope stir inside him for the first time since the warships arrived. But even that hope was fragile, because the sound of soldiers' boots grew louder again, echoing through the tunnels like fate closing in around them. He tightened his grip on Varan's arm and whispered that they were almost there, even though fear twisted in his stomach like a storm, and he pushed forward with determination burning through his exhaustion. Whatever secret Varan carried, whatever danger chased them, whatever power hunted them across the stars, Ethan knew this night would change everything. He just didn't know how, not yet. But he could feel destiny beginning to take shape with every trembling step they took deeper into the shadows of the station. The docking bay ahead glowed with a faint blue light that flickered like a dying star, and Ethan felt Varan leaning heavier against him as they approached the wide, curved doorway that separated the abandoned bay from the maintenance tunnel, every step echoing softly beneath them as if the station itself were listening. The metal door slid open with a tired groan, revealing a vast empty space where old ships once came for repairs, their engines screaming under the weight of interstellar storms. But now the bay was silent except for the low hum of forgotten machines still breathing in the shadows, and Ethan felt something cold swirl through his chest because the quiet didn't feel peaceful. It felt like the calm before an unstoppable storm. Varan's golden eyes scanned the space with fear and memory, whispering that he once visited places like this during peaceful days of exploration, days before shadows took over his life, and Ethan sensed the history behind those words as clearly as the cold air brushing against his skin. But there was no time to ask more, because behind them the distant footsteps of soldiers grew louder again, marching like a closing heartbeat. Ethan guided Varan behind a stack of old cargo crates, each one covered in dust thick enough to show they had been untouched for years, and he crouched with him, trying to catch his breath while the old alien struggled to control his trembling hands, the light from the bay casting pale shadows over his fragile features that looked both ancient and wounded. "We don't have long," Varan whispered, his voice breaking like thin ice. "They will seal the station soon, and once they see my escape traces, they will bring more ships, more soldiers, and they will not rest until I am returned to her." Ethan frowned, trying to piece together everything he heard so far, because the word her carried a weight he couldn't ignore. It felt heavy, powerful, dangerous, the kind of word used for someone who didn't just command but ruled, and he gently asked Varan who the soldiers belonged to, who was leading the hunt, who was sending warships for a frail old scientist running through the shadows of a station. Varan closed his eyes, pain twisting through his expression like a storm, and when he finally spoke, his voice was a trembling echo of sorrow as he said that the soldiers belonged to Princess Azira, daughter of the High Sovereign of the Astrix Empire, commander of the elite Void Guard, and the most feared rising ruler in their part of the galaxy. A leader whose beauty masked a heart sharpened by ambition and cruelty. Ethan felt the air thicken around them, because even he, a simple cargo worker, had heard whispers of the Astrix Empire, a civilization known for its strict order and terrifying strength, and hearing that he was now tangled in the affairs of a princess whose power stretched across star systems made his pulse race with fear he couldn't hide. But Varan wasn't finished, not yet, because truth needed more breath to be spoken. "She is my daughter," Varan whispered, the words shaking as if they tore him from the inside. "But she is not the child I raised. She is not the spirit of hope I once believed she would become." Something shifted in her heart, something dark and hungry. "And now she hunts me because I discovered a secret she will kill entire worlds to keep hidden." Ethan stared at him, the weight of that confession settling into his bones like cold lead, because he knew now that this wasn't just a royal dispute or family conflict. This was something much bigger, something powerful enough to unleash warships, soldiers, and silent threats across the galaxy. And he finally understood why Varan had looked so broken at the ticket machine, as if every step of his journey carried the fear of being caught by someone who once called him father. But before Ethan could ask what the secret was, the sound of metal boots striking the bay floor echoed from the far entrance, sharp and chilling, and Ethan grabbed Varan's arm, pulling him deeper behind the crates as soldiers fanned out across the bay with glowing scanners sweeping wide, their visors slicing the darkness like hunting blades. Ethan held his breath, feeling his heart pounding so loudly, he feared the soldiers might hear it through the walls, and Varan tightened his grip on Ethan's sleeve, whispering a faint warning that if he was captured, Azira's plan would unfold without resistance, and millions across several colonies would vanish under the curtain of silence she wished to spread. The thought made Ethan's stomach twist, because he had never imagined himself in the middle of something so enormous. He was just a human who helped a trembling stranger at a ticket counter, and yet somehow that kindness had thrown him onto a path where lives and worlds hung on every choice he made, on every step he took deeper into the unknown. The soldiers approached closer, their armor reflecting the pale bay lights, their voices cold and mechanical as they spoke through their helmets, stating that heat signatures were detected nearby, ordering units to sweep row by row, crate by crate, shadow by shadow. Ethan knew hiding would not save them for long, not against trained troops armed with scanners and orders, so he leaned close to Varan and whispered that they needed to move before the search line reached them. Even though fear chased every word he spoke, and Varan nodded weakly, trusting him with a silent desperation that made Ethan's chest tighten. They moved in small steps, careful and quiet, staying low behind the crates, inching toward the far end of the bay where an old service hatch lay almost invisible under layers of dust and paint. And Ethan prayed it still worked, prayed old machinery held one last breath of life, prayed fate wasn't already clenching its fist around them. The soldiers' footsteps grew closer, the sound like cold rain falling on metal, and Ethan pressed his hand against the hatch, feeling the panel under his palm, hoping for any sign of power, any flicker of life, any response at all. And when the hatch gave a faint click beneath his touch, opening by a small margin, relief flooded through him like warmth in winter. He helped Varan through the narrow gap as quietly as he could, and just as he slipped inside, the red scanning light of a soldier's visor swept across the crates where they had been hiding only seconds before, the beam stopping, pausing, analyzing, sensing the heat lingering in the metal. Ethan pulled the hatch closed, sealing them inside the dark passage beyond, and the moment the door clicked shut, he felt his entire body shaking with fear and adrenaline. Knowing they had escaped by only a breath, perhaps even less, in the darkness of the hidden tunnel, he heard Varan whisper something barely audible, fragile but filled with truth. "This is only the beginning, human." And Ethan knew it too, deep inside his soul, because destiny had already wrapped itself around them, pulling them toward battles, secrets, and choices far larger than anything he had known before. The hidden tunnel was narrow and cold, its walls made of old metal that carried the faint vibrations of the station, as if it were a living creature breathing above them. And Ethan moved through the darkness with Varan leaning heavily on his shoulder, each step slow and careful as fear chased them like a silent shadow. A faint humming sound pulsed through the tunnel, the energy lines running behind the walls glowing dimly with pale blue light that flickered every few seconds, lighting their faces in soft, ghostly flashes that made the moment feel unreal, as if they were walking through a dream shaped by danger and fate. Varan's breath grew weaker, each inhale sounding like he carried entire galaxies of pain inside his fragile chest, and Ethan tightened his hold on the old alien, whispering that they were close to safety even though he didn't fully know if that was true. But he couldn't let Varan hear the fear trembling inside his own voice. Not now. Not when the old man depended on him more than ever. The tunnel sloped downward until it opened into a wider chamber filled with dormant engines, rusted pipes, and broken repair stations, all covered in dust that danced in the faint blue glow like drifting stars. And Ethan moved carefully through the debris as he searched for anything they could use to escape the station before Azira's soldiers sealed every path. Varan pointed toward an old maintenance shuttle sitting in the far corner, a small craft with scratched paint and loose panels, but one that still had a working fuel core humming weakly from within, the sound vibrating like a tired heartbeat. And Ethan felt a faint spark of hope rise inside him because the shuttle, worn and forgotten, might be their only chance. Ethan approached the cockpit and wiped the dust from the screen, fingers trembling slightly as he tapped the controls, and the shuttle responded with a flicker of dim lights, a groan from deep inside its engines, and then a soft rising hum that made his chest fill with relief because at least the old machine wasn't completely dead. Varan sank onto a crate nearby, exhaustion making his shoulders sag as he watched Ethan work. And after a moment he spoke in a quiet voice filled with sorrow and memory, saying that he once traveled across beautiful worlds with his daughter, before ambition tightened around her heart like a metal cage, before power turned her eyes cold, before truth became something she feared more than war itself. Ethan listened without interrupting, feeling the weight of Varan's grief settle heavily in the air, because this was not the pain of a man running from an enemy. This was the pain of a father running from the child he once loved more than life, and that kind of pain carved deeper wounds than any blade or bullet could. The humming of engines suddenly shifted, and Ethan looked up to see the entire station tremble for a moment, dust falling from the ceiling and lights flickering violently, and he knew this was Azira's doing. He knew that her warships were tightening the lockdown, sealing decks, cutting off escape routes, preparing to flood the lower levels with soldiers, turning the entire station into a cage with no way out except through fire and force. He climbed into the shuttle's cockpit and searched for manual override controls while Varan struggled to his feet and limped toward him, saying the fuel lines would hold for only one short jump, maybe less, but it was enough to get them away from the station and into the broken star lanes where Azira's ships couldn't follow without slowing down. Giving them a chance, a thin one, but a chance, Ethan nodded and began activating systems, the screens glowing brighter, the hum becoming stronger, and the shuttle shaking slightly as if waking from a long sleep, and just when he felt hope begin to steady inside him. A loud metallic crash echoed from outside the chamber, followed by the sharp voices of soldiers shouting coordinates and scanning orders, their footsteps striking the ground with the rhythm of death approaching. Varan's eyes widened with fear that made Ethan's heart tighten, and without wasting another breath, Ethan lowered the ramp and helped Varan climb inside the shuttle, every second stretching like stretched wire about to snap, every footstep outside sounding like doom crawling closer. He sealed the ramp and raced to the pilot's seat, pressing the ignition sequence as the sound of boots reached the door outside, and the shuttle shook violently as its engines roared awake, filling the chamber with blinding white light that burst through the windows and spilled across the floor like dawn breaking over a dying world. Soldiers shouted behind the metal door, weapons charging with sharp mechanical hums, and Ethan could hear them preparing to breach, their countdown echoing through the chamber with terrifying precision. Ethan grabbed the controls and activated the thrusters just as the door exploded inward, sending fragments of metal flying across the room while soldiers stormed in with weapons raised, red targeting lights sweeping through the dust-filled air toward the shuttle. The engine screamed as Ethan pulled the shuttle upward, the craft jerking violently as it scraped against the ceiling, sparks flying like falling stars. And in the last second before the soldiers opened fire, Ethan slammed the launch switch and the shuttle shot forward with blinding speed, bursting through the auxiliary exit hatch that shattered under the force like thin glass. The sudden acceleration pressed Ethan and Varan back into their seats as the shuttle soared into open space, leaving the station behind in a trail of flickering lights and smoke. And Ethan's breath caught in his throat as the view through the front window opened into the vastness of the star lanes, broken pathways glowing faintly in the darkness like shattered constellations scattered across the void. Behind them, Azira's warships shifted formation, engines igniting, with cold blue fire as they began their pursuit, their silhouettes rising like giant predators in the dark, their presence sending a chill through the stars themselves. Varan closed his eyes and whispered that they had moments, only moments, before the chase consumed them, and Ethan gripped the controls with trembling hands, pushing the shuttle toward the broken star lanes with fear burning under his ribs but determination burning even brighter, because he knew now that he wasn't just escaping. He was carrying the fate of countless lives with him through the dark, and there was no turning back, not anymore. The shuttle trembled as it cut through the edge of the broken star lanes, the fractured light around them twisting like shattered mirrors suspended in space, each fragment flickering with the ghosts of old battles and forgotten ships. And Ethan felt the weight of the moment pressing against his chest as if the universe itself was watching their escape. Behind them, the distant glow of Azira's warships burned like cold blue fire, sharp and relentless, growing brighter each second as the enemy engines roared through the vacuum, their soundless fury shaking the very stars around them. And Ethan gripped the controls tighter, his knuckles pale, his breath held between fear and determination. Varan sat slumped in the co-pilot seat, his breathing shallow and uneven, his golden eyes dimming like fading lanterns, and every time he inhaled, Ethan could hear the strain inside his fragile body, as if each breath pulled at threads holding his soul together. Yet the old alien forced himself to stay awake, staring forward as if searching for something hidden within the drifting debris of the old war relics that floated ahead. The star lanes grew more unstable as they entered the relic field. A vast graveyard of twisted metal, broken hulls, shattered weapons, and drifting banners from battles long forgotten, each piece of debris moving slowly in zero gravity, turning the space around them into a haunting monument of lost warriors and dying civilizations. And Ethan felt a chill whisper down his spine as he guided the shuttle between the wreckage. "This place," Varan said softly, his voice trembling with awe and pain, "is where the first human war ended, where your people made their stand against forces far stronger than anyone believed possible, and where they showed the galaxy why humans are feared, respected, and never underestimated." Ethan stared through the front window, his eyes tracing the details of the wrecks floating around them, the faded earth insignias painted on some of the broken hulls, the silent cannons pointing toward nothing, the shattered cockpits where human pilots once sat with courage burning in their hearts. And he felt something raw rising inside him, a mixture of sorrow, pride, and an unfamiliar sense of belonging to something much larger than the quiet life he once lived. Varan reached out and rested his thin hand on the glass as if touching the memory of those who fought here, whispering that he had always believed humans were dangerous because of the stories he heard when he was young, stories that painted humans as wild, unpredictable, unbreakable. But as he grew older, he understood that humans were not dangerous because they wanted war. They were dangerous because they refused to surrender when the universe pushed them to their knees. Ethan felt those words echo deeply in his mind, making him breathe slower, steadier, as he guided the shuttle deeper into the relic field. And he realized something quietly powerful. Varan understood humanity better than many humans he had met, and that understanding made Ethan feel seen in a way he never expected from an alien worlds away from his own. The shuttle's scanner beeped sharply, pulling Ethan out of his thoughts, and he looked down to see the red indicators flashing in warning, showing that Azira's ships had entered the relic field, their sleek armored forms slicing through the drifting metal with predatory precision, their lights piercing the darkness like cold blades. And fear surged through Ethan as he realized they had only seconds before the enemy caught their trail. Varan looked at the scanner, his face tightening with urgency, and he whispered that they needed to reach the core of the relic, the preserved command station from the final human stand, a place hidden deep inside the debris, protected by old defense codes only humans could activate. And Ethan understood immediately that this wasn't just a hiding place. It was a shield, a sanctuary built from the will of soldiers who died protecting the galaxy. He pushed the shuttle forward, weaving between broken spires of metal and drifting remains of ancient fighter ships, the engines screaming as he maneuvered around jagged debris that felt too close, each near collision sending a jolt through the small craft. But Ethan refused to slow down because slowing meant dying. And the thought of Azira taking Varan filled him with a fire stronger than fear. The deeper they went, the darker the field became, until the only light came from the shuttle's front beam and the faint glow of Varan's dimming golden eyes. And then, through the shifting shadows, Ethan saw it. An enormous metal sphere, cracked yet still intact, floating silently at the heart of the relic, its surface etched with old earth symbols and battle markings that time had failed to erase. Varan whispered with reverence, saying this was the final human command station, the place where the last defenders stood together despite impossible odds. And Ethan felt chills spreading across his skin as he approached it, feeling the history breathing inside the steel walls as if the spirits of the fallen still guarded it. The station's outer doors opened with a groaning metallic sigh as Ethan aligned the shuttle with the docking frame, the ancient systems recognizing the human signal in the shuttle's transponder. And the shuttle slipped inside the sphere just as the first of Azira's ships broke through the last wall of debris behind them, their blue lights hunting through the dark like wolves closing in on prey. The dock sealed shut behind the shuttle with a heavy thud that echoed through the hangar like the heartbeat of a massive beast. And for the first time since their escape began, Ethan felt a moment of stillness, a fragile slice of silence between chaos and survival. Varan slumped forward, coughing harshly, his body shaking with exhaustion and pain, and Ethan rushed to his side, steadying him as the old alien whispered that they had reached the sanctuary but had very little time, because Azira would not stop, not here, not anywhere, not until she destroyed everything that stood against her. Ethan looked at the ancient station around them, at the forgotten relics of human courage resting in the darkness. And he felt resolve ignite inside him like a flame refusing to die. If this place held the truth, if this place held the key to stopping Azira, then he would fight for it, protect it, honor the legacy of those who died here. Because he was no longer just a cargo worker running from danger. He was now the human carrying a destiny that reached across stars. And the universe would soon learn that kindness could spark a fire stronger than any warship. The ancient command station hummed with a low trembling sound as if waking from 1,000 years of sleep, and Ethan stepped out of the shuttle with Varan leaning against him, feeling the weight of the old alien's weakened body, as well as the weight of the destiny pressing on both of them like invisible gravity. The air inside the station felt colder than space itself, carrying the scent of rusted metal and echoes of old human voices. And the dim emergency lights flickered along the curved walls, glowing in soft red pulses that made it feel like the station still had a heartbeat, still had memories of the soldiers who once defended it with their lives. Varan's breathing became more uneven, his steps slower, and Ethan guided him into the main corridor. Every footstep sounding painfully loud in the silent hall as if the walls were listening, watching, waiting to see what the intruders would do with the sacred place left behind by the fallen. The deeper they walked, the more the station revealed itself, showing rooms filled with shattered helmets, cracked visors, old rifles resting against the walls like tired warriors, and torn earth flags floating gently in the low gravity, each one carrying stories of human courage that time refused to erase. Varan paused beside a row of rusted control panels and ran his trembling fingers over the dusty screens, whispering that humans had fought here with impossible bravery, surrounded by fleets stronger than their own, refusing to surrender even when defeat seemed certain. And Ethan felt something inside his chest shift, a quiet pride rising like a warm flame in the cold air, reminding him that humans were not defined by strength but by the fire in their hearts. A sharp alarm echoed through the station, slicing through the silence like a warning scream, and Ethan turned toward the far wall where a flickering holomap activated, revealing blue dots entering the relic field, moving fast, coming straight toward the command station with cold precision. And dread tightened around him as he recognized the formation of Azira's elite pursuit fleet. Varan leaned heavily against the wall, his voice barely more than a whisper as he told Ethan that Azira would not send a full army into the relic field. She would come herself. She would land with her personal guards. She would walk through the ruins to retrieve the crystal and silence the truth forever, because nothing frightened her more than being exposed to the Galactic High Council. Ethan swallowed hard, fear twisting in his stomach. Yet beneath it something stronger stirred, a fierce refusal to let Varan's journey end in blood and silence. And he reached out to steady the old alien, whispering that they still had time, still had purpose, still had a chance to reveal the truth if they reached the data core hidden in the heart of the station. Varan nodded weakly and pointed toward a large metal door sealed shut with ancient human security locks, and Ethan approached it, running his hands over the rough surface coated in dust, feeling the cold metal pulse faintly beneath his palms as if the station recognized his touch, recognized the human blood running through his veins. A faint hum awakened under his hand, and the door slowly slid open, revealing a massive circular chamber filled with hollow screens, projection pillars, and old transmission arrays still glowing with the faintest traces of energy. And Ethan stared in awe because it felt like stepping into the center of a sleeping giant, a heart waiting to beat again after centuries of silence. Varan moved to the central pillar and pulled the small crystal from his robes, holding it like something sacred, something dangerous, something heavy with truth, and he pressed it into the ancient slot carved into the pillar's core, the crystal glowing brighter as the chamber filled with soft blue light that danced across the walls like living waves. The screens flickered to life, displaying fragments of Azira's crimes, stolen communications, secret deployment orders, intercepted plans to wipe out dissenting colonies and blame it on human aggression. And Ethan felt a cold shiver as the truth revealed itself in quiet, merciless clarity. But the moment of revelation was shattered by a violent explosion that shook the entire station, sending dust raining from the ceiling and lights flickering wildly. And Ethan spun around just as the entrance corridor filled with blinding blue fire from Azira's flagship engines as they forced their way into the relic's atmosphere. Varan clutched Ethan's sleeve, his voice cracking as he whispered that Azira was here, that they had only moments before she reached the core, and Ethan could feel the air tightening with tension, filled with the footsteps of destiny rushing toward them like a storm they could not outrun. The station shook again as armored boots echoed from the outer corridor, the sound sharp and cold as it bounced off the metal walls, and Ethan grabbed Varan, pulling him behind one of the hollow pillars as the first of Azira's elite guards marched into the chamber. Their armor thick and gleaming, their weapons glowing with crackling blue energy. They scanned the room with red visors, moving with the calm confidence of predators who believed victory was already theirs. And behind them stepped Princess Azira herself, tall and graceful, her armor adorned with the royal insignia, her eyes bright with cold fire that held no warmth, no mercy, no trace of the kindness she once knew as a child under her father's guidance. She stepped into the chamber like a queen walking into her throne room, her voice soft yet cutting as she ordered her guards to find Varan and retrieve the crystal hole. And Ethan felt Varan trembling beside him, the old alien's breath raspy and fragile, his fear heavy yet mixed with sorrow deeper than the void outside the station. Azira moved closer to the core, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the glowing screens showing fragments of her betrayal. And for a brief moment, her expression flickered with something sharp, something furious, something desperate, because she knew the truth was here, alive, breathing, ready to escape her control. Ethan felt his heart hammering like thunder inside his chest, and he knew there was no more hiding, no more running, because destiny had cornered him here in this ancient chamber, and now he had to decide whether he would rise or fall, whether he would protect Varan or surrender him to the woman who had darkness burning beneath her skin. He reached for the old alien's hand, feeling it cold and shaking, and whispered that he was with him, that he would not let Azira take him, that he would fight even if he had no weapon, no armor, no training, because sometimes the heart of a human was enough to challenge the galaxy. The chamber seemed to hold its breath as Princess Azira stepped deeper inside, her boots clicking softly against the metal floor, each sound sharp and cold like the touch of steel on bare skin. And Ethan felt Varan's trembling beside him grow heavier as if his fading strength were slipping through Ethan's fingers like sand in a storm. Azira moved with the calm confidence of someone who believed the universe bowed beneath her will, her golden crown-shaped armor catching the pale blue glow of the ancient screens around her. And when her eyes scanned the room, the cold fire inside them seemed to burn through every shadow until it almost touched Ethan's hiding place, making his heartbeat thunder in his chest. Varan's breath hitched softly, and Ethan tightened his grip on the old alien's hand, whispering that he wouldn't let her take him, even though fear pressed against his ribs so hard it felt like he was breathing inside a collapsing star. But he refused to move, refused to surrender, because something deep inside him had awakened, something fierce, something human, something unbreakable. Azira stepped closer to the core pillar, her fingers trailing across the blue glowing surface as she stared at the flickering images showing her own crimes, her own plans, her own hidden commands, and for the first time, a crack appeared in her expression, a flash of silent rage mixed with the faintest hint of fear, because she could not erase what the core had awakened, could not silence what had already begun to expose her. "Find them," she ordered, her voice soft yet filled with venom that slid through the air like a blade, and her guards fanned out, scanning every corner of the chamber with their glowing visors, their weapons humming with deadly energy that could tear through steel and bone alike. And Ethan knew they had only seconds before the guards reached the pillar they hid behind. Varan squeezed Ethan's hand weakly, his voice a thin whisper as he said that if he fell now, the truth would die with him, the colonies would burn, and Azira's heartless rise to power would go unchallenged. And Ethan felt something ignite inside him, a spark that roared into flame, because he was not ready to watch this old man, this gentle, broken, hunted father, be stolen by the child he once loved. So Ethan stepped out from behind the pillar before fear could stop him, his breath shaking but his step steady. And the moment he moved into the open, the entire chamber froze, the guards turning their weapons toward him, Azira lifting her head with slow disbelief, and Varan watching from behind the pillar with eyes wide and filled with sorrow and hope all at once. Azira studied Ethan with calm, cruel curiosity, her eyes narrowing as she recognized him, the human who helped her father escape the terminal, the human who should have walked away but chose to interfere, and a cold smile curved across her lips as she stepped toward him, her presence sharp as a blade dressed in beauty. "You should not have involved yourself, human," she whispered, her voice like silk stretched over iron. "You are far from your little world, far from your simple life, far from the place where your kind still believes they are safe." And Ethan felt the words strike him, but he did not back away, did not flinch, because he had seen enough to know that kindness was not weakness and fear was not surrender. He said nothing, just stared at her with a calm she did not expect, and something in his silence seemed to anger her even more, because she took a step closer, her armor glowing faintly, her eyes sharp as burning stars, and she asked where her father was, where the crystal was, where the truth had been hidden. Ethan slowly lifted his hand and pointed toward the core pillar glowing behind her, and Azira spun around, confusion flashing through her expression, only to see Varan stepping out from behind the pillar, leaning heavily on the glowing surface, his frail form illuminated by the blue light, his golden eyes filled with a heartbreaking mixture of love and disappointment as he whispered her name. Azira froze, her breath catching for the first time, and for a brief moment, she looked like a daughter again, a child remembering the warmth of a father who once guided her. But then the cold fire returned to her gaze, swallowing the flicker of humanity, and she raised her hand, signaling her guards to aim at him. Varan took a shaky breath, lifting a trembling hand toward her, and whispered that he had never wished to fight her, never wished to expose her, never wished to stand against his own blood. But she had crossed a line that even a father could not ignore, and his voice cracked as he said she had chosen power over mercy, fear over truth, and death over her people. Azira's jaw tightened, and in a flash of fury she stepped forward, striking Varan across the chest with a blast of energy that sent him collapsing against the pillar, his cry echoing through the chamber like a wound tearing open the air itself, and Ethan screamed his name as he rushed forward. But a guard slammed him back with a force that sent him crashing onto the metal floor, pain burning through his body like fire. Varan fell to his knees, coughing blood, his body shaking violently, and Azira approached him with slow, merciless steps, raising her weapon to end him, to silence him forever. But before her finger touched the trigger, Varan used the last of his strength to press his hand against the pillar, activating the final sequence that launched the data crystal into the void through a hidden emergency beacon, sending the truth toward the Galactic High Council with unstoppable speed. Azira's eyes widened with shock and rage, her scream of fury echoing through the chamber as she fired at the old alien, her blast striking him through the heart, and Varan collapsed in Ethan's arms, whispering with his final breath that kindness can change galaxies, that no truth dies if someone carries it forward, and that he was grateful Ethan had been there when no one else would stop for him. Ethan held him tightly, tears burning his eyes as Varan's hand fell limp, and something inside Ethan shattered, something deep and human and powerful, rising through him like a storm as Azira turned toward him with murder in her gaze. But before she could strike, the chamber shook violently as human warships burst into the relic field outside, answering the beacon signal that Varan had sent, their engines roaring like thunder, their presence filling the void with hope and fury. Azira's guards stumbled as the station trembled with battle fire, and Ethan rose slowly, pain licking through his bones, grief burning through his soul, but resolve blazing like a star ready to explode. Azira stepped back, her confidence shaken, her eyes wide with the realization that her truth had slipped out of her grasp, that her rise to power was falling apart in real time. And Ethan stared at her with a calm that made her freeze, because she could see it. This human would not break. This human would not surrender. This human would carry Varan's last wish, even if it cost him everything. The station shook again as explosions echoed outside, and the final battle erupted across the stars. And the story of one human's kindness was now etched into the fate of an entire galaxy.